So when you look at the prospective future, you have a history of success now coming to this moment. You have attracted the attention of those who wish you well, and you've attracted the attention of those who do not wish you well.
Yes.
So what do you think are the pieces in play that you would want to see developed further in order to allow you to maximize that leverage? So over the next 10 years, what are the most important things that India has to do and get right if it is to achieve these ambitions of greater space, greater presence, and greater influence on rulemaking?
At one level, you could say, I'll give a short version of your question if I understood it right, which is really, what is it you're going to do to make the rise faster?
Yes.
So my answer would be, at one level, really to keep finding the right combination of partners to advance your interests. And I would emphasize that at one, you could say, well, I've heard various words used. I've used myself some words. It's not that simple, because it would depend on the domain, as I said at my conversation at the beginning of this conference, your economic partners, your political partners, your security partners, your technology partners, your energy partners are not the same. So the weightage will differ, sometimes the combination would differ. But if you make a kind of a aggregate of all of this, you will get a clear set of outlines. Not every country would declare this openly, but there are very few countries which don't have a sense of who their fundamental partners are and who their fundamental challengers are. Okay. So the way to rise, I would say, is to maximize that the opportunities, and the opportunities are provided by the contradictions of the world. Every rising power looks for contradictions, because if there were no contradictions, there's no space for the rising power to move. So it's not like, what would you wish for? I take the world as I get it. Yes, today perhaps a little more than I was before. I could shape some of it. But I'd be honest, I don't think I can fundamentally shape the world. I think there's still many other powers much more powerful than me who have that capacity. But I would look at the global contradictions and assess from that the possibility of utilizing that to my national advantage. Now, having said that, there are times when you would hedge, or I would hedge.
Yes.
There are times when I don't think hedging by itself should be a reflex policy. It would depend on the situation. It would depend on the issue. It would depend on the moment. So there are issues, I think, where we need to be much more, in a sense, simplistically in the middle. There will be issues where it would be foolish for me to be in the middle, because my interests are clearly involved, and I need to actually shape the narrative, set the narrative. And part of what you said, to try to aspire or seek to become a leading power, is that ability of picking and choosing, where to shape, where to actually get ahead, where to be a little bit prudent, where to be in the middle. So it's really a very nimble footwork,
yes.
If you would say. And it's a very 360 kind of vision of the world and its prospects. And I think that's really what is required for this country, and for some time. I still think we have good ways to go.
So let me ask you a question. And I take the point completely that having a stable sort of congeries of partners will be critical for India moving forward. What how would you deal with these partners who wish you well at two levels? What do you tell them is the value proposition for them in terms of supporting India? Mm-hmm. And two, what capabilities would you imagine India bringing to the table that would make India an attractive investment destination, not in an economic sense, but in a political sense, for the partners that you envisage?
You know, in a way, actually, that's exactly what I do. I mean, if I were to go to any country or meet any other foreign minister or anybody else, most of my meetings are sliced up that way. The first part of it is, what use am I to you? And frankly, the second part of it is, what use are you to me? There is, this sounds horribly transactional. I don't want it to come out that way, because I think when we say use, it also means if you have beliefs. I mean, to me, utility is not a non-belief activity. There are beliefs, there are values, there are commonalities out there. They do matter very much, in my opinion. They certainly create comfort levels which somebody with a very different sociology may not give you. But a large part of the conversations of a foreign minister, certainly a foreign minister of a country which seeks to be a leading power, is really to put before your potential or actual partners what is the value proposition that India brings. And secondly, what is it why is it important for them, as you said, to invest in India? Now, let me kind of illustrate that with some examples, because this is now beginning to sound very, very philosophical. So, I would say today, an India which is willing, in a sense, very an exemplar in green and clean technologies, or an India which is today sort of a successful, not an experiment, but a successful deliverer on digital goods. And which shares that view that, the digital era requires trust and transparency. Or an India which is part of a reliable supply chain. Or an India that on a certain set of strategic, which say works with other partners on maritime security. These would be examples. But I would also, one part of it would be, look, you and I can work together and we can do these things together. But the other part of my persuasion or projection would be an India which is economically strong, is a strategic asset to a large part of the world. And India, for example, which is a first responder, bears a big part of the global burden. And India, which is today an innovator and a contributor, let us say, in space or cyber or nuclear, is part of a global effort to develop those domains in a certain comfortable way. So a lot of it is, it's not in that sense, yes, it's a competitive world, but the heart of my business is, in a competitive world, how do you create the commonalities? How do you take along other countries, so that they also reasonably calculate that their benefits and the global collective benefits are there. That's really what my business is about.
Let me ask you a sort of philosophical question, and it comes from the Prime Minister's, formulation of what he sees as a desirable world order. So it has always struck me that despite all the competitive elements in international politics that you referred to, the Prime Minister has still emphasized the idea of a common humanity, a common vision, and so on and so forth. In practical terms, what challenges does that impose? Because you have a vision which is very unifying, which sort of focuses on reconciliation among many competing entities on a very large and macro scale. And yet in your business, you have to deal with, the rough and tumble of the competition. So how do you work that out? The vision that looks for commonalities and the realities that are competitive, where, it's a dog-eat-dog world sometimes. And in your own neighborhood, the environment is not always conducive to realizing that vision that the Prime Minister has. So how do you balance this desire for cooperation amidst the enduring realities that there are some people who simply don't want to cooperate with you because their interests or their ambitions are different?
Well, there is much merit to casting bread on waters. So when you actually, this larger vision, I would argue that the larger vision actually yields concrete benefits. There is a larger vision, Today, we have this program called Vaccine Maitri, which is like vaccine friendship, by which we supplied vaccines to a very large part of the world. Okay, and many of the recipients of these vaccines were countries who had vaccine production centers much closer than India. So if you go to many countries in the CARICOM, in the Caribbean, or you go to people in the Pacific, or you go to countries in Africa, many of them, their first vaccines came from India. Whereas, as I said, theoretically they could have got it from alternative sources. I cannot overstate to you the goodwill and the impact that it has made on countries. And by the way, it was not an easy decision, because this was a time when we were vaccinating our own people. So somebody could reasonably have asked, saying, why are you sending vaccines out? But I think it was part of the Prime Minister's belief that, while, yes, our primary duty is obviously to our own people, at the same time, we should also make that additional effort and reach out. But the idea of doing good is not impractical. There's actually a deep practicality underpinning that. It's part of a certain brand building, of a certain image. Again, if you look at the last 8 years, the development programs that we have done across the world has really ramped up multiple X's. But it's not just the fact that we're doing programs outside. We've been very, very clear. Prime Minister personally has been very clear. He went to Kampala and laid out what he called the principles of development cooperation, and basically told Africa that, look, we are prepared to work on your priorities, your programs, your projects. If you tell us what is of interest, we'll try and do what you want. Now, for the Africans to have someone come and say, look, you tell me what you want, and I'm prepared to tell you yes or no, I can or cannot do it, I think was very different from what they were used to. Similarly, if you look, you mentioned the neighborhood. Today we have actually, I wouldn't say transformed the connectivity in the neighborhood, but it's clearly changed enormously. But that connectivity goes both ways. I mean, we built a power grid to Nepal at a time when Nepal was power deficient. And, Kathmandu has gone through some decent years because of that. But today the same power grid helps us to get power back from Nepal. So we do not actually really have this. There are countries who have this nationalistic view of my nationalism versus the world. That is not the way we are messaging. For us, the idea of having global agenda, global good, global acceptability completely harmonizes with the fact that I'm also advancing my national prospects along with it. And I think that does set us apart. So in a sense, even though I know it's a absolute oxymoron. We have a kind of internationalist nationalism.